The wind screamed across the mountain, sharp and cold enough to slice through the thickest gear. A line of recruits in gray fatigues clung to the cliff face, their boots scraping against frozen stone. Below them, the valley stretched into a cloud-covered abyss. One wrong move, and it was over. Among them was Rowan Hale, the smallest of the group. Her frame looked too light to carry the heavy pack strapped to her shoulders. Her gloves, cracked and worn from days of climbing, gripped the rope until her knuckles turned white. "Come on, rookie," one of the men shouted over the wind. "You're holding up the line." The others laughed. Even the squad leader smirked. "She's doing her best, Jenkins," he said, though the tone wasn't kind, more pity than praise. "Maybe she's not built for cliffs." Rowan didn't answer. Her breaths came slow and steady, eyes locked on the next anchor point. Every inch upward was earned with pure will, but when her boots slipped on an icy ledge, the rope jerked, and for a heartbeat the entire line went still. "She's gonna fall," someone shouted. The others braced, but Rowan didn't scream. She caught herself with one hand, dangling above a 1,000-foot drop. Snow whipped against her visor and her arm trembled, yet she didn't let go. Finally, she pulled herself back to the rock face inch by inch, until she was secure again. When she reached the top, drenched in sweat and snow, the group was already there, waiting, smirking. "Not bad," Jenkins said, tossing her a water pouch. "Didn't think you'd make it." "Guess gravity missed today," a few snickered. Rowan looked at them but said nothing. She simply took the water, set it down, and checked her gear. That silence bothered them more than words ever could. Their commanding officer, Major Riker, arrived moments later, a man carved from stone and experience. He scanned the group, his gaze landing on Rowan. "Who's leading the next ascent?" he asked. Jenkins raised his hand. "I'll take point, sir." "She can stay in the middle. Safer that way." Riker's eyes flicked between them. "You think you're strong enough to lead?" "Yes, sir." Riker nodded, then turned to Rowan. "And you? You think you belong here?" Rowan met his gaze, calm and cold as the mountain air. "Yes, sir." Riker studied her for a long moment before turning away. "Then prove it. Tomorrow's climb. No ropes, no safety line. Only instinct," the group groaned. Jenkins muttered something under his breath, something about suicide training. But Rowan just nodded. "Copy that, sir." That night the storm rolled in, snow thick as ash, thunder echoing through the peaks. Inside their makeshift camp, the recruits huddled by a flickering lamp. "She's going to freeze up there," one said. "She'll quit before sunrise," another replied. But no one noticed Rowan outside, crouched by the cliff's edge, tightening the same rope that had almost failed her earlier. The wind howled, but she wasn't listening to it. She was listening to the mountain. Every gust, every creak in the rock, she was learning it. Because in the morning, when they started climbing again, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They might see her as the weak one. But this mountain was about to show them who she really was. The next morning, the mountain was cloaked in fog so thick it blurred the horizon into white nothingness. Every breath came out as steam, hanging in the air before vanishing into the cold. Major Riker's voice cut through the wind. "You know the rule, no ropes. Trust your footing. Trust your team." The recruits lined up, tightening gloves and checking gear. Jenkins gave Rowan a smirk. "You sure you don't want to sit this one out, rookie? Could be your last climb." Rowan didn't even look at him. She simply said, "Move." He laughed. "Yes, ma'am." The climb began. One by one, they scaled the vertical face of the ridge. It was slow, methodical, dangerous. Every step was a gamble between life and gravity. Halfway up, the storm returned. A wall of wind that tore across the cliffs, pelting them with snow and shards of ice. The fog turned into chaos, and soon they could barely see each other. "Stay close," Riker shouted, his voice barely cutting through the roar. "If you lose sight, you're dead." Rowan was near the rear, following the path of footprints etched faintly into the frost. Her fingers were numb, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her focus was unbroken. Then it happened. A sound, sharp, metallic, snapped through the storm. The anchor point above her gave way. Crack! The line of climbers jerked violently as the rope snapped free from the rock. Jenkins screamed. Riker shouted orders, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The world tilted. The rope lashed out like a whip. Rowan lost her footing, the wind catching her mid-step. She reached for the wall, fingers scraping stone, and missed. For a heartbeat, she was weightless. The cold hit her chest like a punch. The world blurred into snow and shadow as she fell backward into the abyss. Someone screamed her name. Or maybe it was just the wind. Then, silence. The line steadied. The remaining recruits clung to the rock, panting in disbelief. "She's gone," Jenkins gasped. She didn't make it." Riker's jaw clenched. He scanned the edge, saw nothing but white. "Move! We keep climbing. But, sir, move!" No one argued. They climbed in silence, every gust of wind whispering her name back at them. By the time they reached the top, the storm had swallowed the ridge. Riker marked her as lost. "Fell at Yo 900, he said into the radio. "No recovery possible." Hours later, they reached a small plateau and set up shelter. The storm raged outside, shaking the tent like an angry hand. Jenkins sat near the heater, hands trembling. "She didn't even scream," he muttered. "Didn't even fight it." Riker didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the blizzard beyond the flap, mind replaying the fall. Something about it didn't sit right. The rope hadn't broken naturally. He'd heard the tension, felt it. It was cut. By lightning? Or something else? He didn't know. But as the wind howled through the night, the mountain groaned, deep and guttural, like it was alive. And buried beneath that sound, faint but distinct, came a noise none of them could explain. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Getting closer. By dawn, when the storm finally broke, Jenkins woke to find fresh tracks in the snow. Small, deliberate, and leading straight toward their camp. He stumbled outside, heart pounding. The prints stopped just short of the tent, and beside them, pressed into the snow, was a single word carved with a knife. Still here. The morning sun rose weak and pale over the ridge, painting the snow in streaks of gold and gray. The storm had left the world shattered, ice clinging to ropes, tents half buried, and silence heavy enough to crush words. Major Riker stepped out first, rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning the trail. "Form up," he ordered. His voice carried the calm of habit, but something in his eyes said he hadn't slept. The team gathered, boots crunching on hard snow. Jenkins stared at the tracks near the tent, the ones that shouldn't exist. "Sir," he said quietly, pointing. "They're hers." Riker crouched, studying the prints. They were too neat, too purposeful to be wind drift. "Could be an echo trail," he muttered. "Snow distortion." But even as he said it, he knew better. No distortion spelled words. Still here. They set out down the slope, packs heavy, lungs burning from cold. The air was too thin for comfort. Every step echoed through the canyons below. Hours passed in uneasy silence until Jenkins froze mid-step. Wait. Something was wrong. The path ahead was marked. Too neatly, too clearly. Colored ribbons fluttered from branches and rocks. Someone had been here. Recently. Riker moved forward, hand raised for quiet. The others followed, nerves high. Then, from behind them, a voice spoke. Quiet, steady, and cold. "Took you long enough." The group spun around. Standing in the blinding light of the morning sun, covered in ice and dirt, Rowan Hale leaned casually on her climbing axe. Her face was pale from the cold, blood crusted along one cheek, but her eyes, sharp and alive, burned like fire in the snow. No one spoke. Jenkins stammered, How the hell?" She cut him off. "Next time you secure a rope, check your knots. You almost killed everyone." She tossed a piece of frayed line at his feet, the same rope that had snapped. Riker stared. "You climbed back up?" Rowan nodded. "Not this side." The west face. Steeper but cleaner. "Less wind," Jenkins scoffed, still in shock. "That's impossible." Then it's a good thing I didn't ask for permission, she said flatly. The others just stared at her. The girl they'd written off, buried in snow and failure, was standing there alive. Colder than death, but very much real. Inside the cave they'd used for shelter, Rowan sat near the small fire they managed to spark. Steam rose from her gloves as the ice melted off. No one dared speak. Finally, Riker broke the silence. You disobeyed orders. You should have stayed with the team. Rowan met his gaze without flinching. I didn't disobey, sir. I survived. There's a difference. For a moment, the wind was the only sound between them. Then Riker nodded once, not in approval, but in recognition. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers who'd crawled out of graves. She's not weak, he said quietly. The others shifted, guilt twisting in their chests. Jenkins swallowed hard, staring at the fire. By nightfall, the storm had moved east, leaving a sky so clear it looked painted. Rowan stood outside the cave, watching the stars. Jenkins walked up, hesitating beside her. Hey, he said finally. Back there. You shouldn't have, Rowan said, not looking at him. He nodded, shame settling heavy in his throat. You really climbed that west face? Rowan finally turned toward him, her breath fogging the air. No, I didn't climb it, he frowned. Then how? I ran it. She turned away, her voice soft but sharp as the mountain air. The mountain doesn't care who falls, only who climbs back. The mountain had stopped roaring, but the silence that followed was worse. It pressed against their ears, forcing each of them to listen. Not to the wind, but to themselves. Rowan walked at the front now. No one had told her to. It just happened. Her boots dug into the snow with practiced precision, her eyes scanning the ridges above for shifting rocks or loose ice. Every few steps, she'd mark a safe route with a red ribbon pulled from her sleeve. Clean, efficient, exact. Behind her, the same men who'd mocked her now followed quietly. No jokes, no smirks, even Riker said nothing. He just watched. By mid-morning, they reached a frozen pass that looked impossible to cross. The bridge of ice connecting both cliffs had cracked down the middle overnight. One wrong step, and the entire span would collapse into the canyon below. Jenkins cursed. We'll never make it across that. Rowan crouched, running her gloved fingers along the edge of the break. We don't need to cross it, she said calmly. What are you talking about? She stood, eyes flicking toward the slope to their left. That ridge curves into the canyon wall. It's steeper, but it'll bring us out 200 meters north, right behind the extraction point. Riker frowned. That's uncharted terrain, exactly, which means the enemy scouts won't expect us there. The group stared at her. She'd just redirected the mission with the ease of someone who'd done this before. Riker studied her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. You heard her. Move. The climb that followed was brutal. The slope was nearly vertical, the ice brittle and slick. But Rowan led like she'd been born on the mountain. Never hesitating, never second-guessing every few meters. She'd stop to secure a foothold for the next person. Halfway through, Jenkins slipped again, his boot skidding on the ice. He shouted as his grip broke. Before anyone else could react, Rowan swung around, catching his harness with one hand. Hold still, she barked. Her arm muscles screamed, but she didn't let go. She anchored her axe into the wall, pulled him upward, and locked his line. Jenkins dangled there, staring up at her, his breath coming in panicked gasps. Why'd you do that? He stammered. She didn't look back. Because if one of us falls, we all fail. When they finally reached the top, the team collapsed in exhaustion. Rowan didn't sit. She checked their packs, counted supplies, recalculated timing. Riker watched her quietly, the way she worked, the control in her tone, the calm in her movement. He'd seen combat leaders break under less. She hadn't even flinched. That night, around the fire, the men finally spoke. Not to her, but about her. You know who she reminds me of? One whispered. Those recon ghosts, the ones who vanish into the snow. Yeah, Jenkins muttered. Except this one came back. Riker's voice broke through the quiet. You all misjudged her. You saw a weak one. He looked toward Rowan, who sat sharpening her climbing axe, sparks catching in the firelight. What you didn't see, he said, was a survivor. Rowan didn't hear the words. Or maybe she did and just didn't react. Her eyes were fixed on the mountain peak above them, the same ridge where she'd fallen. Tomorrow, they'd have to climb it again on their way down. And this time, she'd make sure no one else fell, because now, it wasn't just training anymore. It was something else. It was personal. The sky broke open before dawn. Snow came down in sheets so thick that the world vanished into white. The mountain screamed, an avalanche forming somewhere above. Riker shouted orders through the radio, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Form up. Visibility's gone. Anchor down." The team scrambled for cover, plunging their axes into the ice, tethering ropes to the rock face. But the storm didn't care about orders or ranks. The wind ripped one of the tents away, then another. Through the blizzard, Rowan moved like a ghost. Low, fast, controlled. She reached the far end of the ridge where Jenkins and 2 others were pinned under a wall of snow. "Hang on," she yelled, throwing herself down to dig. Her gloves tore as she clawed through the ice, blood mixing with frost. "Rowan, fall back." Riker's voice crackled through the comms. "That section's unstable." She didn't stop. "I said fall back." Her shovel struck metal, Jenkins' harness buckle. She grabbed it and pulled. The snow gave way with a sudden roar, collapsing down toward the canyon below. Riker lunged, grabbing her rope, but the surge of snow yanked her off balance. For a second, she was weightless again, falling, but this time her axe caught the edge of a buried ridge. She swung once, twice, and jammed it deep. The fall stopped, violently. Her shoulders screamed in pain. Above, Jenkins gasped for air, half buried, but alive. "Got you," Rowan panted. "You're not dying on my watch." She heaved him out, one arm useless, the other pulling with sheer will. Snow caked her face, her lashes frozen, but her focus never wavered. When they finally reached the shelter point, Riker met her with wide eyes. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, half angry, half awed. "You could have been killed." Rowan straightened, her breath fogging in the freezing air. "He could have been too." Riker just stared. Then, after a long pause, nodded. "You're not weak," he said quietly. "You're one of the toughest soldiers I've ever seen." The storm raged for another hour before easing. The team regrouped, battered but intact. They'd lost half their gear, but they were alive because of her. Jenkins limped up beside Rowan, his voice cracking. You ever been through something like that before?" Rowan's eyes drifted toward the horizon, where faint sunlight glimmered through the mist. "Once," she said softly. "And back then, nobody caught me." No one asked more. When the storm finally cleared, their extraction signal came through, faint but real. The chopper would arrive in 20 minutes. As they packed what was left of their equipment, Jenkins turned to Riker. "She's not just trained," he whispered. "She's been through hell." Riker nodded slowly. "She's why we made it." 15 minutes later, the helicopter's blades sliced through the thin air. The rescue team spotted the orange flare and descended. As they boarded, one of the pilots leaned out, scanning Rowan. "Who led you out?" he called. Riker pointed at her. She did. The pilot's eyes widened. "Her? That's impossible. We saw her name on the KIA list 2 years ago." Rowan paused mid-step. The men turned toward her. For a long moment, she said nothing, just looked at the horizon again. Then, she murmured, "I guess they were wrong." The helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the mountain that had nearly buried them. Below, the cliff where they'd pushed her glowed faintly in the dawn light. And for the first time since the fall, Rowan allowed herself a small private smile. The weak one was gone. What stood in her place was something the world wasn't ready to name. The base was quieter than Rowan remembered. 3 days had passed since the mountain mission. 3 days since the impossible rescue. The storm had left its scars, frostbite, fractures, silence, But the team had made it home. They said heroes returned to applause. Rowan returned to stairs. When she walked into the debriefing room, conversation stopped. Officers shifted uneasily. Some avoided her eyes entirely. At the far end of the room, Colonel Hayes, the one who had signed her discharge papers 2 years ago, stood waiting. His uniform was crisp, medals gleaming, but his expression carried something he rarely showed: doubt. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Sergeant Rowan." She stayed standing. "You marked me as unfit for duty, sir. Why change of heart?" The colonel sighed, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were the mission photos, aerial shots, thermal readings, the radio logs. The last one showed her pulling Jenkins from the avalanche, her harness shredded, her face bloodied. "You were supposed to be dead," he said quietly. "Your file. Your entire unit went down in an ambush. No one survived." Rowan's gaze darkened. "We did. For a while." Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from memory. "They left us to burn when the chopper went down. I crawled out. 3 didn't. So I stopped waiting for rescue. I learned how to rescue myself." The colonel closed the folder. "And now," she said, her eyes steady, "I save whoever's left." Word of her survival spread through the base faster than wildfire. Recruits whispered her name in the halls: the ghost soldier, the one who came back. When Riker and the others saw her again, there was no teasing. Jenkins, the same man who had once called her dead weight, stood at attention when she entered. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" he asked. Rowan smirked. "When did I become ma'am?" "When you became the reason I'm still breathing." The room laughed softly, but behind it was something heavier. Respect. Real respect. Later that night, Rowan walked to the edge of the base's perimeter. The desert stretched endlessly. The same horizon she had once crawled across, bleeding and broken, years ago. Riker joined her, hands stuffed into his jacket. "They said you were a myth," he said. "A rumor passed between platoons." "Maybe I was," she replied. "Maybe it's easier to believe in ghosts than survivors." He smiled faintly. "Either way, you saved all of us. That's not something ghosts do." She didn't answer. She just stared at the stars, remembering the faces of the ones who hadn't made it home. The next morning, Colonel Hayes made it official. Rowan was reinstated. Her rank restored. Her name cleared, and her new assignment shocked the room: Instructor, Advanced Survival and Reconnaissance School. Riker blinked. "You're teaching?" Rowan grinned. "Not teaching, preparing." "For what?" "For the next soldier who gets thrown off the cliff." At sunset, she stood on the training ridge again, the same one where it had all begun. Below, recruits huffed and stumbled through the ice field, shouting, laughing, arguing. One of them slipped, cursed loudly, and started climbing again. Rowan watched silently, arms folded. When Riker approached, she finally spoke. "They still think strength means not falling," she said quietly. "They don't understand that it means getting back up." Riker nodded. "They will." A cold wind swept across the ridge, carrying with it the echoes of the past. Her fall, her climb, her defiance. Somewhere far below, the cliffs still bore the scars where she had been thrown. But now they were just marks on stone. Rowan turned away, her silhouette fading against the fire-colored sky. She had fallen once. She had risen twice. And now, every soldier who trained under her would know the truth. The weak one was the reason none of them would ever fall alone again.